You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster Podcast. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the iHeartRadio app, or your preferred podcast platform. Enjoy. So there's been a lot of controversy over the last couple of years as far as the lack of minority head coaching hires in the sport. Topic we've definitely covered on this show before, but so this proposed rule change, for anyone that hasn't heard about it, essentially, if you were to hire a minority head coach and that coach was to be on your team for a year or longer, that team would be rewarded with additional draft pick compensation, or at least being the ability to move up in the third round. Now, for myself, I just kind of like look at that. And again, you talk about like tone deaf statements. You look at things that are kind of a little bit, frankly, condescending. I'm not a big fan of it. I think, like, for me, if I'm going to be hired, I want to be hired because I know I'm the best at my position or my field or what I'm doing, not because I think that the organization or my boss is going to get an extra kickback from it. So, Coach, how are you feeling on this one?
I don't like it as a backhanded slap. I mean, I just think it's complete BS just to incentivize teams to get better draft picks just to pick a minority coach. I mean, yes, it's an issue. The fact that these teams are predominantly African American, and I'm not saying that, a white male can't motivate black males, but sometimes a black male wants to, see another black face in their face, kind of motivating them. And it would be nice to kind of see that more often in the NFL. I mean, think about it. This league has gone through so many different social injustice changes in the last 2 years or 3, with all the Colin Kaepernick stuff and the Jay-Z stuff and all this other crap. And it's almost like you're just making it worse. And I just don't like it at all.
What about you, Drake?
So I agree. I think it's sort of a backhanded, like, hey, we're trying to help you out. And I do appreciate that the NFL is trying to do something, and Coach Owen, I think you were sort of getting at, is that we see the ratio of players that are black and, or other minorities in the league compared to the ratio of coaches. And you could tell it's majority all white coaches, right? Like, I can think of Brian Flores and Mike Tomlin in the league right now as the 2 black head coaches. And I think that's probably about it. And so obviously there's some discrepancy there. And you can tell that, like, hey, there is something wrong. It's either with the owners or the way they're evaluating coaching talent. Something needs to change. Something needs to be fixed. But I don't think this is the way to do it. This is basically just patronizing me, saying like, hey, we're helping your team out. And I, as a coach, would feel less valued. I'd feel that the organization is only keeping me around to get better draft picks or move up in draft position in the third round or whatever round it might be. I'd rather go out and prove myself. And if you're a coach like, let's say, Brian Flores, for instance, last year, he did a fantastic job with the Dolphins. Nobody thought that they were going to be that good. And he ended up doing well. They had a much better record than everybody anticipated. And they were able to draft the quarterback still that they had wanted. And then Mike Tomlin, he's never had a losing season as a head coach. He's had a lot of tied seasons or lower winning seasons, in that 6 range, but he's still never had a losing season. So these black coaches, like, they know that they're good coaches. We just need to find other ways of making sure that the league and the owners are doing their due diligence and saying, hey, we're going based off talent and who's most deserving, and not just off skin color. But this, I don't agree with this policy.
Now, it's an idea. I get that we're trying to fix the problem and we're just trying to throw as many things at the wall and see what sticks as possible. But I feel like there has to be a better conclusion that they could have drawn than this. I was praying kind of that this was a joke headline when I first read it. I was like, this can't be real, right? But here we are. It still needs to be voted on, approved, and everything like this. And I think hopefully based off the public backlash that this has received, it will get shot down. But ultimately, too, and my thought on it overall is just like, if you're owners, you're going to do whatever you want to win, because wins equal money in this general sport of like the NFL. So like, if you can find like someone that can connect to these players in whatever way that is, and it doesn't really matter what that person's skin color is, it's a matter of like, are they qualified enough head coach? Now you look at coaches like Eric Bieniemy and you wonder like, what is that kind of like disconnect? Because you know how well the Andy Reid coaching tree has done in the league. Look at what would it take to really incentivize to get like someone like that a coaching job over like a Joe Judge. I think the biggest problem in head coaching right now is nepotism that kind of comes with the coaching trees as a whole, because generally a lot of the coaches that have jobs in the league right now, it's either they know someone who knows someone who brought them on, or they coached under this guy and let's bring him in. A lot of coaches' sons are in the league right now. I think that's probably the biggest thing that needs to be phased out potentially, but it's tough.
That's coaching in a lot of sports. I mean, in basketball in particular, that's huge in the college game. Even in the NBA, think of, is it Bickerstaff? Didn't he take over someone's team this year? I mean, it's all over the whole minority thing, even in college basketball and probably in the NBA. You know, there's not that many black head coaches in general. So, I mean, I'm with Dre on the fact that, yeah, they're trying to make a little bit of an effort, but I just kind of think this effort's like the worst like handout they could probably give. Like, it's almost like, hey, we know there's shortage of black coaches, but just to kind of, you know, let you come back, we'll give you some reparations for it. You know, it's like, I don't know. In 2020, it's just not it's a very, very bad message, I think.
Austin, let me get you in kind of in this conversation. Do you have any potential ideas for like fixing this? Because we always like address the problem. We always say this is a problem. But unfortunately, the big problem that I see is particularly when we talk about this in the media, no one's thrown out answers, right?
Man,
a lot of questions. You can say this is an answer, but it's not a great answer is the one thing to look at it.
I'd say, man, it's a good start, just a bad idea. You know, to me, it's 2 + 2. And right now I think there's 3 black head coaches in the NFL. But at the end of the day, I think you got to just hire more, you know, minority coaches. And there's a lot of people out there that deserve it. It's a hard topic because at the end of the day, like when I read that, I was just confused. I didn't even know, like I thought it was a joke. I thought it was kind of like, you know, one of those made up articles. I didn't think this was really a proposition. So I just think we have to come up with a lot better ways to not insult people that we should probably give more jobs to, instead of just kind of, here's a backhanded thing. We're not going to hire you more, but we'll just give you a little draft pick here.
Here's kind of like another thought I have. I feel as like the media, we could be better when it comes to minority head coaches, because too often, like when we've seen like several coaches be one and done, several minority head coaches be one and dones in the league, such as Steve Wilkes or Vance Joseph had a couple years with the Broncos. But it seemed like after poor seasons, and both of those coaches went to rebuilding teams that weren't really exactly in a position to win. The media was the ones calling for their heads, honestly. Like, there's a ton of people that were like, man, you look at Vance Joseph, he's just not getting the job done with the Broncos. Steve Wilkes, like, the Cardinals were horrible last year. Steve Wilkes is not the head coach of the future. And it's like, well, if we're not giving them a chance and we're the people driving the narratives on this, then how is like anyone else going to give them the opportunity, right? And, you know, to like the credit, so like you have like situations like Marvin Lewis, who was there for 15 years. I know it's easy to hammer on all the bad things, kind of like with Marvin Lewis, such as the fact they never won a playoff game. But overall, you look at the success the Cincinnati Bengals had during that time compared to the rest of their franchise's history. You have to give a guy like Marvin Lewis a lot of credit. Now, there are situations where it's like,
no doubt.
Yeah, where there are situations like it's Hugh Jackson, for example, right? Hugh Jackson just is a bad coach. Doesn't matter like his ethnicity at all. You look at the record, you can't justify like a Hugh Jackson. That's fine. But, you know, like I think we could give a little bit more leeway to these coaches that get put in just bad situations. Like what happened with Brian Flores. He went to a team that was honestly dog shit. Like if you look at the Dolphins were giving him and was managing to turn that into just one of these teams that a lot of people are excited about moving forward. I think we just got to give more time and effort to allowing these coaches to grow.
Well, it's just an unfortunate narrative. I was watching Glory Road yesterday, and it was actually kind of comical when the coach walked into the bathroom hearing, you know, the white reporters say, how can a team full of 5 black players beat a team full of 5 white guys? And it's almost comical because now it's almost the complete opposite nowadays. And it's unfortunate that people still have that stigma, like, oh, a black guy can't run a team. You know, he's not smart enough to do this, or he probably can't do this. They need to hire a more offensive-minded guy like this or like this, or, you know, kind of like you were saying, you know, who's the Jets coach that was black? What's his name? He just got fired a year or 2 ago, and he's the DC, I think, with Arizona.
I know this one, Todd Bowles. There we go.
Todd Bowles. Okay. You know, I feel like some of these guys don't get the time that some of these other coaches get to kind of, you know, implement their system and put their program in place. Not everybody has an overnight success and changes a team to a playoff team in their first or second year. So it kind of takes some time, where I feel like some of these guys don't get the time. Like Mike Tomlin, for example, is a guy, you just see him. He's a player's coach. He gets those guys fired up, and he just he knows how to relate to some of those guys. And I personally feel like some of it, comes from them looking like him. He can kind of relate to those people and understand the lingo and the culture and how to motivate that type of kid, or that type of male. And I just think guys don't get enough time to implement their system. I just think it's unfortunate that these guys still have that narrative that they just think a minority can't do that job.
And I thought too, and Dre can touch on this, obviously he's a Steelers fan. Mike Tomlin, for some reason, he has been one of the more criticized head coaches in the league when I talk about kind of like the weird media narratives too that kind of get talked about. Obviously never had a losing season in the NFL, and yet I feel like every year we're talking about Mike Tomlin as a potential hot seat head coach. Now, Dre, what do you kind of think of your own personal head coach in this situation, as he's most recognizable minority head coach in the league?
Yeah, so for me, prior to last season, I was sort of on the fence. I was like, maybe Tomlin sort of run his course in Pittsburgh, right? We haven't been seeing the results that we once saw when he was able to get to the championship, right? And to win those Super Bowls. But then I saw last season where we literally had garbage throwing the ball at our quarterback position, right? As we lost Big Ben, and then Juju Smith-Schuster was out for, a few games. We had some other players that were hurt. James Conner wasn't performing like he had normally done the season prior. And yet, he was still able to basically get us within striking distance of the playoffs and still, not have a losing record, and was able to avoid that. And so now I'm like, okay, I'm totally on board with Tomlin, but I think it's a combination of a few things. So one, I think it is that the Steelers, the fan base, and I think the league as a whole expects the Steelers just to be so good all the time, just because they're one of those historic franchises that very rarely do you see outside of the playoffs. So I think that adds a little bit to it. But then the other thing is, I think you're right. I think part of it does have to do a little bit with race, and that had this been a white head coach, if you were to say, hey, this white head coach has never had a losing season and they've won Super Bowls, they've gotten teams to a few Super Bowls, and they're always in the playoffs, right? And now that we're expanding, he would have been in the playoffs every single year pretty much. I think everybody says, oh yeah, why would you ever get rid of that guy? That's got to be the first or second best coach in the league. But since it's Tomlin, everybody's like, oh, you got to fire Tomlin. And Tomlin's not perfect, right? We've seen him make his mistakes. He doesn't get the team necessarily always ready for when, we're playing easy teams, right? I think there's a lot of trap games that we end up losing to teams that we're just underprepared for. But at the end of the day, if you look at his resume and you look at his record and you see what he's been able to do, you're exactly right, Juju, is that he takes a lot of heat unnecessarily.
Now, Dre, Orlando, either one of you guys can answer this one. I asked Austin this. What are the answers? What is a good plan to really get things up and going in this position without giving extra incentive draft pick to do it?
I don't know, man. That's an interesting question. The way they had it before, where I think you had to interview at least one, I think you had to interview at least one minority for a job. And I don't even know necessarily that even really kind of opened the door for some of these guys to get that opportunity. Honestly, I don't know when it'll take, but this is just really way out in left field. But I think it's going to take some big time entertainer or someone to own an NFL team to hire a black coach or have more African-American money in these ownerships of teams to really start changing the head of the team. I just think the owners are so, I don't know, I just feel like they're still in that old stigma. I mean, it's still to the point where some of these teams have a hard time picking a black quarterback. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I just think it may take, someone just throwing this out there. Maybe LeBron James retires and buys the Cleveland Browns, and someone else, some other black entertainer wants to buy a NFL team. I think that might change it, but I don't know if there's an answer to this in the next 5 to 10 years. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's probably actually what will need to happen. I think you're exactly right, is, if Jay-Z owns a team, right? I know he's partnered with the NFL. Now he buys a team. I'm sure Cam Newton, right? We see Cam Newton still doesn't have a job, and he's probably the best available quarterback right now on the market, and probably one of the best available quarterbacks that was, available in free agency. He doesn't have a job. I guarantee, you have a Jay-Z or, like you said, another black entertainer probably picks them up right away and has no issue with it. Or, if Tomlin, for whatever reason, was to get fired, I guarantee, a black owner would pick up Tomlin in a heartbeat. I think any owner would. So I think you're exactly right on that. Other things, I've looked at diversity in the workplace for like office jobs, and they do things like trying to anonymize, the way that you put in your resume. So that way you're not just going off of like, oh, what's their name, right? Is it John Smith or Jaquan, right? Or something like that. So if there's a way to anonymize, how you select your candidates so that you don't know who it is that's applying. You basically just see like, hey, this person has 5 years coaching experience. This other person has 7. Who do you want to choose in that pool? I think that might help. I don't know, unfortunately, the process of how you select coaches in the NFL as much as I do like just regular workplaces. I think that might help. One other idea, and it sort of is still another backhanded sort of compliment, but like if the league says, hey, if you've got a minority coach, right, we'll maybe cover their salary so it doesn't come out of your organization, all the way up to, the max. You could pay the max for a head coach or whatever. I thought that was another idea just to give teams an incentive to be like, hey, we're willing to try out a head coach. And at the very least, it saves us money out of our organization, right? But I could see the same argument of like, oh, well, now you're just hiring me to save money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's where I could see it making a turnaround. And it could happen very quick. Let's say Brian Flores comes out, kicks ass this year. Dolphins look as a potential Super Bowl contender. One thing we know about the NFL, it's a copycat league. Everyone wanted to hire the next Sean McVay 2 years ago. Everyone is now looking for their athletic black quarterback after seeing what Lamar, Deshaun, RG3, and a lot of quarterbacks have done this decade. If we do see that next success story happen, whether that's Eric Bieniemy or another upstart head coach potentially in the future, hell, even maybe Anthony Lynn out there in the Chargers has a really good turnaround and really takes control of like the narrative that he's the head coach of the Chargers, then I think that could potentially be the catalyst that potentially leads to more, as more owners are like, I want to get into this market. I want to get a slice of the pie. Another idea I've seen thrown out there is offensive head coaching is like really what is very much desired right now in the league. Unfortunately, there's been a shortage of minority coaches that are on the offensive side of the ball.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, if more minority head coaches or more minority coaching candidates could get on that side of the ball, wide receiver, running back, quarterback, that's going to open the door big because that's going to be who you're going to pull from for your offensive defensive coordinator jobs, from your assistant coaching jobs, and those are what's going to lead to that head coaching pipeline.
Yeah, I was honestly going to touch on to that was the league loves bringing in these offensive-minded OCs that come in and take head coaching positions. And I'm sitting there thinking, when's the last time you heard of a black offensive coordinator that was labeled an offensive genius?
Honestly, around the league,
None. I mean, my uncle, for example, he's associate athletic director for the football team at Clemson. Him being an offensive coordinator at Alabama, I want to say he was the first African-American offensive coordinator at University of Alabama. And I know that was a very controversial time in the 90s, but, it's just from the 90s to 2020, like that's one stigma you don't hear is a black offensive coordinator or a black coach being labeled as an offensive genius. It's always like black defensive coordinator. He brings in this tough-minded defensive philosophy, for example, like Todd Bowles. I just think those narratives, especially in 2020, that word narrative is so powerful where all of a sudden you get this label and then it sticks on you and it sticks on you. And then all of a sudden, like you don't ever lose that label and you don't get a chance to kind of get a different name where how many offensive coordinators do we see that are black? I'm a 49er fan, Shanahan, nothing against him. He's a great coach. As you were saying, nepotism, his dad's the pipeline. And, I just don't see too many African-American coaches in that seat to be able to be that offensive coordinator on a team that gets to a Super Bowl and all of a sudden gets, that head coaching job where, the team and the fan base and everybody's right behind you. I just don't see that. Even with Tomlin, like we were saying, for the last 3 to 4 years, they've been trying to call for his job. And the guy's resilient, dude. He's like, he just fights it off and still does his job. And, it's just very commendable for someone like him in this day and age, that, he's still holding it down. It'd be nice to start seeing some of these African-American coaches get a fair chance as, some of these other guys do.
Yeah. To tag on to that, Coach O, I think we were talking about having a black owner. I think it would be even more powerful if you have a white owner that changed the narrative in the way that you're saying. Like if a white owner comes out and says, hey, I'm picking up this, black head coach, moving him up from offensive coordinator because he's an offensive genius and he can outcoach anybody else in the league. I think that would do wonders. I think it would totally revolutionize.
It's funny You said that because I was actually going to say that, but you know, the way O said that black coaches and black owners can understand how a kid coming up with the same type of, you know, environment, I guess I could see that too, but it's just hard to get past that boundary of, can you let the white owner connect, and did he come up the same way as the African American kid? And it's just getting past the color of the skin, unfortunately, this late, you know, in 2020, and we just got to start doing better, honestly.